This book is dedicated to the countless nameless individuals who languished in the cold, damp shadows of medieval prisons. Their stories, often lost to the annals of time, remain echoes in the dark corners of history. They endured unimaginable hardship, suffering in silence, their voices unheard, their pleas unanswered. While we may never fully comprehend the depths of their despair, their experiences serve as a stark reminder of the fragility of justice and the enduring need for humane treatment of all, regardless of their circumstances. This work is also dedicated to those who, through tireless research and scholarship, have sought to illuminate the often overlooked aspects of medieval life, revealing the harsh realities that lie beneath the romanticized surface. Their dedication to uncovering the truth, however grim, allows us to learn from the past and to strive for a more just and equitable future. The painstaking reconstruction of lives lost, pieced together from fragmented records and archaeological finds, is a testament to the power of historical inquiry and a reminder that even the faintest whispers from the past deserve to be heard. Furthermore, this book is dedicated to anyone who has ever felt the weight of injustice, whether personally or vicariously. The experiences recounted within these pages, while rooted in a distant era, resonate with enduring themes of oppression, inequality, and the constant struggle for fairness. May this exploration of the past serve as a beacon, illuminating the paths towards greater understanding and empathy, and fostering a world where the horrors of medieval prisons are consigned to the history books, not repeated in any form. The echoes of suffering should inspire a commitment to ensuring that future generations need not endure similar torment, and that the pursuit of justice remains a constant and unwavering endeavor. May this book be a catalyst for reflection and a call to action towards a more just and compassionate world, one that learns from the mistakes of the past to create a better future for all. Chapter 1: The Iron Cage, a glimpse into medieval prisons. The air hung thick and heavy, a miasma of mildew, sweat, and something indefinably foul that clung to the back of the throat and refused to be dislodged. Thomas, his ribs protesting with every shallow breath, pressed his cheek against the cold, damp stone of his cell. He'd been here, in this subterranean tomb, for what felt like an eternity, though it was likely closer to 6 months. 6 months since the bailiffs had dragged him from his meager cottage. 6 months since the weight of his father's debts had crushed him beneath the unforgiving heel of the law, or what passed for law in this God-forsaken place. From his cramped cell, a sliver of light, barely enough to pierce the perpetual gloom, illuminated a section of the dungeon's rough-hewn stone walls. The construction was brutally functional, a testament to the grim efficiency of medieval incarceration. He could hear the rhythmic clang of hammers above, the grunts of laborers working on an extension, deepening the dungeon's already oppressive labyrinth. It wasn't a prison designed for rehabilitation. This was a place built to break men, to crush their spirits under the weight of despair. The stone itself was a testament to the builder's lack of artistry. Rough-hewn blocks haphazardly fitted together, leaving gaps that whistled with drafts in winter and sweltered with the summer's oppressive heat. There was no mortar smooth enough to conceal the cracks and crevices that seemed to writhe with the dungeon's own malevolent life. Water seeped through the stone, staining the walls a sickly yellow brown and leaving a constant sheen of moisture that chilled him to the bone. The air, thick with the stench of decay, felt like a physical weight pressing down on his chest. Yet, within this crude construction, there was a chilling precision. Thomas watched, his eyes tracing the lines of the stonework as a new section of wall was raised. It wasn't simply a matter of stacking stones. This was a deliberate architecture of despair. The builders weren't creating comfortable cells. They were crafting cages designed to maximize confinement and dehumanization. The placement of bars, each one thick enough to stop a charging ox, was strategically calculated to prevent escape, to constantly remind the inmates of their utter powerlessness. He observed how the narrow slits that served as ventilation were positioned high above, out of reach, offering only a meager, tantalizing sliver of the outside world, forever beyond his grasp. They were a cruel reminder of the air he desperately needed, yet couldn't quite reach. The dungeon itself was a complex system of interconnected cells radiating from a central corridor. Thomas glimpsed other prisoners, shadowy figures behind their own bars, their forms barely visible in the gloom. Some were chained to the walls, their shackles a constant clanking reminder of their imprisonment. Others huddled in corners, wrapped in filthy rags, their bodies racked with coughs and shivers. He saw the glint of metal on the ground, a discarded spoon perhaps, or the broken fragment of a chain. These small, almost insignificant things served as reminders of the despair surrounding him, the hopeless monotony of his daily existence. The lack of sanitation was horrific. Human waste festered in the corners of the cells, a breeding ground for flies buzzing incessantly around the chained figures slumped against the cold, damp stone. The stench, acrid and penetrating, was a constant assault on the senses, a physical manifestation of the dungeon's degradation. The floor was perpetually damp, covered in a slick layer of mud and refuse. Rats, fat and bold, scurried in and out of the shadows, their eyes gleaming like tiny, malevolent jewels. These were not just pests, they were the dungeon's unwelcome companions, their presence an ever present reminder of the utter disregard for human dignity within these walls. Thomas wasn't alone in his suffering. Countless others shared his fate in this labyrinthine prison. He heard their moans and coughs, the low mutterings of madness, and the occasional sharp cry of pain. The sounds blended together into a terrifying symphony of despair, a constant soundtrack to his confinement. Sometimes, the sounds of guards patrolling the corridor punctuated the silence, their heavy footsteps echoing like the rhythmic beat of a death knell. Their voices, when they spoke, were harsh and coarse, devoid of any semblance of compassion or humanity. Their presence was a constant reminder of their absolute power, their control over life and death within this desolate realm. The architecture wasn't merely the arrangement of stones and mortar. It was the embodiment of a system designed to crush the human spirit. The lack of light and ventilation weren't accidental oversights. They were deliberate choices designed to strip prisoners of their humanity, to break their will, to reduce them to shadows lurking in the darkness. The very layout of the cells, the strategic placement of guards, the inescapable stench, all contributed to a chilling environment of controlled despair. It was a system designed not just to punish, but to dehumanize, a cold, brutal testament to the medieval understanding of justice. The contrast between the crude exterior and the deliberate systematic design was particularly striking. While the construction seemed haphazard from the outside, reflecting the rough methods of the times, the internal design was meticulously crafted to inflict maximum suffering. Each cell, each corridor, each barred window, all were elements in a carefully constructed machine of misery. The builders hadn't merely erected walls, they had built a monument to despair, a testament to the power of the state to inflict suffering. The absence of comfortable spaces, the meager provision of light and ventilation, all contributed to a dehumanizing experience aimed at stripping inmates of their dignity and will. It wasn't a building constructed in haste. It was a meticulously planned space that served as a physical and psychological weapon against those held within its walls. Thomas often watched the masons and laborers as they worked, his gaze following their every movement. They were building not just a prison, but a tomb, a place where hope went to die. Their work was far from an artistic expression. It was the cold, mechanical execution of a design meant to break men. And in the chilling precision of their work, Thomas saw a reflection of the system that had condemned him, a system devoid of mercy and compassion, driven solely by the brutal logic of power and retribution. The architecture itself was a statement, a chilling declaration of the state's absolute power over its subjects, a power that was wielded not with subtlety or sophistication, but with crude efficiency and unrelenting cruelty. The dungeon was not just a place of confinement. It was a monument to the darkness of the human heart and the brutality of medieval justice. The days bled into one another, indistinguishable except by the subtle shifts in the dungeon's oppressive atmosphere. A damp chill clung to the stone, even in the summer months, a constant reminder of the earth's cold embrace. The lack of natural light warped time, stretching moments into agonizing eternities and compressing weeks into a blur of unending monotony. My stomach, perpetually gnawed by hunger, became a relentless metronome, marking the passage of time with its hollow pangs. The meager rations, flung into my cell with the casual brutality of a man throwing scraps to a dog, were barely enough to sustain a sparrow, let alone a man. Thirst was an equally persistent tormentor. The water, when it arrived, and it didn't always, was a murky brown liquid that tasted of stagnant earth and decay. I would hoard it, sipping it slowly, savoring each drop as if it were the rarest nectar, desperately trying to stave off the parching dryness that constantly threatened to consume me. Sleep offered little respite. The cold, damp stone was a hard and unforgiving bed, and the cacophony of groans, coughs, and the incessant gnawing of rats provided a nightmarish symphony that kept me perpetually on edge. The dungeon's air, thick with the stench of urine, feces, sweat, and decay, was a constant assault on my senses. It clung to my clothes, to my skin, permeating every fiber of my being. The smell of sickness was pervasive, a miasma of dysentery, typhus, and the ever-present threat of the plague hung heavy in the air. I watched men waste away, their bodies ravaged by disease, their faces gaunt and hollow. Death was a familiar presence, a constant companion lurking in the shadows, snatching victims with chilling regularity. The sounds of their dying breaths, the rasping gasps, The gurgling coughs became a chilling soundtrack to my own slow descent into despair. The air itself felt thick with the weight of so much suffering, a palpable manifestation of the dungeon's accumulated misery. Sanitation, or the lack thereof, was perhaps the most horrific aspect of this subterranean hell. Human waste accumulated in the corners of the cells, festering and breeding disease. Flies, attracted by the putrid stench, buzzed incessantly, their relentless hum a constant, maddening accompaniment to the dungeon's other horrors. Rats, fat and brazen from their constant feast on human refuse, scurried freely through the cells, their beady eyes gleaming with malevolent intelligence. They were not merely pests, but symbols of the utter disregard for human life within these walls. They moved freely, fat on what should not have been food, as if we were already as good as dead. Violence, both physical and psychological, was a constant threat. Fellow prisoners, driven mad by hunger, thirst, and despair, often turned on one another, their desperation fueling brutal acts of aggression. The guards, figures of cold authority, added another layer of terror. Their cruelty was arbitrary and capricious. A stray word, a misplaced glance, a perceived slight could provoke a burst of violence from them. They patrolled the corridor, their heavy boots echoing a relentless rhythm of oppression, their presence a constant reminder of our utter powerlessness. Their eyes, cold and devoid of empathy, scanned the cells, searching for any sign of rebellion or resistance. I tried to maintain a semblance of routine, a futile attempt to impose order on the chaos of my existence. Each morning, I would perform a rudimentary form of ablution, using the meager drops of water that remained in my bowl from the previous day's ration. I would then spend hours staring at the stone wall, trying to occupy my mind, to distract myself from the gnawing hunger and the relentless despair. I began to count the cracks in the stone, cataloging their shapes and sizes, creating a phantom map to fill my vacant mind. This was a necessary coping mechanism to avoid succumbing to the encroaching madness that held many of my fellow inmates in its thrall. My interactions with my fellow inmates were sparse and tentative. Fear and suspicion dictated our relationships. Trust was a luxury we could not afford. Yet, in the shared misery of our confinement, there were moments of brief, fragile connection, a shared piece of bread, a whispered word of encouragement, a shared look of understanding. These small gestures were powerful reminders that we were not completely alone in our suffering. We communicated through coughs and pained expressions across the gaps of the thick stone walls. One man, a wiry fellow with a haunted look in his eyes, caught my attention. He was a former weaver, his fingers still bearing the marks of his trade, and the only sign of hope I knew in these dire conditions. He had spent most of his days humming forgotten songs of the countryside, his voice a fragile counterpoint to the sounds of despair. His singing was a desperate attempt to summon memories of a life beyond the dungeon's oppressive walls. His melodies gave us a semblance of comfort during those bleak days. Another prisoner, a burly blacksmith named Thomas, ironically the same name, who found a small fragment of metal amongst the dirt and muck, found enough pieces to forge a crude knife, a small tool that we used to chip away at the stone, an act of silent rebellion in our prison. His relentless dedication to his work gave us a shared understanding, an unlikely camaraderie, a small spark in our desolate existence. As the days stretched into weeks and months, the psychological toll of confinement became almost unbearable. The constant darkness, the deafening silence broken only by the sounds of suffering, the unrelenting stench, all these things slowly eroded my spirit, chipping away at my will to survive. The deprivation of touch, of warmth, of human contact, the relentless grinding routine of surviving another day, another night, took a psychological toll. I lost track of time, of dates, of days of the week, and even the seasons seemed to lose their distinctive features. The dungeon seemed to exist on its own terms, and I with it. The lack of light affected my sense of self. The constant darkness eroded my sense of spatial orientation, and my perception of time became profoundly distorted. I'd lose track of days and nights, struggling to tell the difference between a lingering dusk and the oppressive darkness of early mornings. The world outside the dungeon's walls began to feel like a fading memory, a half forgotten dream. The dungeon's oppressive environment was a weapon as much as a prison. It was designed not only to punish, but to dehumanize, to break the spirit of its inhabitants. The lack of light, of fresh air, of adequate food and water, it was all part of a deliberate strategy to strip prisoners of their humanity, to reduce them to shadows lurking in the darkness. Survival in this place was a daily struggle, a constant battle against hunger, thirst, disease, and despair. But in this relentless battle, I found unexpected resilience. The simple act of cleaning a part of the floor, of seeking out a more comfortable spot, brought a small moment of peace, a moment that allowed me to remember that survival and life itself, even in this prison, was worth fighting for. The memories, the songs, the quiet exchanges across the walls, the simple acts of defiance, these small things kept my hope alive. Thus were the quiet acts of survival that defined each day and my experiences in the cold, dark, miserable dungeon. The weight of the chains was more than just physical, it was a crushing burden on the soul. Initially, the iron biting into my flesh was the most immediate agony. Each link, cold and unforgiving, dug into my skin, leaving raw, bleeding welts. But as days bled into weeks, the physical pain became a dull ache, a constant companion overshadowed by a deeper, more insidious torment, the psychological erosion of hope. The chains themselves were symbolic, a visible manifestation of the invisible shackles binding my spirit. They were a constant reminder of my powerlessness, my utter subjugation to the whims of my captors. Sleep, when it came, offered little respite. Nightmares, vivid and terrifying, haunted my dreams. I relived the moment of my arrest, the cold steel of the guards' weapons, the crushing weight of their judgment. Even in the waking hours, the dungeon's oppressive silence was punctuated by the cries of the suffering and the squeaking of vermin, creating a soundscape of despair that seeped into my very being. The relentless darkness, unbroken save for the flickering of a distant torch, twisted my perceptions of reality. Days and nights blurred into an indistinguishable mass, leaving me disoriented and adrift in a sea of unending misery. Starvation was a slow, agonizing process. The meager rations, barely enough to keep a bird alive, were dispensed with a casual cruelty that underscored the utter disregard for our lives. Hunger gnawed at my insides, a constant gnawing pain that overshadowed all other sensations. My body wasted away. My clothes hung loosely on my frame, a testament to my dwindling strength. The pangs of hunger weren't merely physical, they were a constant, visceral reminder of our helplessness. It was a slow, deliberate process of dehumanization, reducing us to mere shadows, our bodies gradually consumed by the dungeon's cold, hungry embrace. Yet, amidst the deprivation, there were moments of unexpected humor, black and twisted though they were. We found amusement in the absurdity of our plight, in the grotesque irony of our situation. We would share macabre jokes about the rats, comparing their plump bellies to the meager portions of gruel we received. We'd make light of the guards' incompetence, their brutality, and their sheer lack of basic hygiene. These gallows humor moments, though few and fleeting, were crucial to maintaining a sliver of sanity in this hellish abyss. They were a small rebellion against the oppressive reality of our captivity. But the laughter was always tinged with a deep undercurrent of fear and desperation. The constant threat of violence, both from the guards and from our fellow inmates, hung heavy in the air. A casual kick, a hurled insult, a sudden beating, these were commonplace occurrences. We walked on eggshells, constantly alert to any perceived slight that could trigger the wrath of our captors or the desperation of our fellow prisoners. The guards, shadowy figures of authority, were unpredictable and capricious. Their cruelty was arbitrary, often born of boredom or malice. We learned to anticipate their moods, to read the subtle shifts in their behavior, always striving to avoid becoming the target of their whims. Beyond the physical punishments, the psychological torment was perhaps the most devastating. Isolation, a deliberate tool of oppression, was designed to break our spirits. The lack of human contact, of meaningful interaction, slowly eroded our sense of self. We became shadows, our personalities stifled, our identities lost in the dungeon's oppressive atmosphere. It was a cruel strategy, a calculated attempt to strip us of our humanity, to reduce us to mere animals struggling for survival. One day, I witnessed a man driven mad by hunger and despair. He had been incarcerated for a minor crime, a debt he could not repay. He began to talk to the rats, feeding them scraps from his meager rations, treating them as if they were his only companions. His sanity had been devoured by the darkness of the prison. He was no longer himself. His descent into madness was a chilling reminder of the insidious psychological effects of prolonged confinement. It was a testament to the dungeon's ability to break the strongest spirits. The psychological impact of the confinement extended far beyond the walls of the prison. Even after my release, the memories of the dungeon would haunt me, the constant chill and unrelenting despair leaving an indelible mark on my soul. The memories of my fellow inmates, their suffering, their slow descent into madness, continued to haunt my thoughts and dreams. The scars, both physical and emotional, were a constant reminder of the horrors I had endured. However, even in the face of such unspeakable cruelty, there was a certain resilience to the human spirit. The shared misery fostered a strange camaraderie among the prisoners. We found strength in our shared experience, a bond forged in the crucible of suffering. We shared stories, whispered words of encouragement, offered each other what little comfort we could. In the darkness of the dungeon, we discovered a surprising humanity in one another, a flicker of hope amidst the despair. These small acts of kindness, these fleeting moments of connection, were vital to our survival. They were small flames of resistance against the crushing weight of despair, a defiant affirmation of our shared humanity. They reminded us that even in the deepest darkness, the human spirit could endure, could even find ways to flourish. In those fleeting moments of connection and compassion, we found the strength to carry on, to endure, to survive another day in this living hell. It was these moments of quiet defiance, of shared resilience, that helped me to keep my sanity and my hope alive. The stench of stale urine and rotting food hung heavy in the air, a constant, suffocating presence that clung to the very fabric of the dungeon. It was a smell that permeated everything, seeping into my clothes, my skin, my very being. It was a smell that would forever be etched into my memory, a visceral reminder of my time in this subterranean hell. Yet, amidst this miasma of decay, I found myself observing, almost clinically detached, the tapestry of human suffering woven around me. My cell, or rather my corner of the common chamber, afforded a grim panorama of the human condition under the thumb of medieval justice. There, chained to the opposite wall, was a young woman, barely more than a girl, her face gaunt and drawn, her eyes hollowed out by hunger and despair. She had been accused of stealing a loaf of bread, a desperate act of survival, a crime born of necessity, yet one that condemned her to this living tomb. Her crime, in the eyes of the Baron, was not merely theft, but an affront to his authority, a transgression that demanded punishment. The irony was not lost on me. A single loaf of bread, the sustenance that could have staved off starvation, had become a symbol of rebellion, a catalyst for imprisonment. Next to her sat a burly man, his beard matted with grime, and his clothes torn and ragged. He was a blacksmith, I learned through snippets of overheard conversations, accused of forging counterfeit coins, a far more serious offense, one that threatened the very fabric of the Baron's feudal system. His punishment was proportionally harsher, solitary confinement for extended periods, with the meager rations reduced to a starvation diet. His hardened face, though, belied a quiet strength, a fierce determination to survive that radiated from him like a palpable aura. He didn't complain, didn't whimper, only stared with cold, unyielding eyes, as if daring the dungeon itself to break him. Across the chamber, huddled in a shadowed corner, was a wizened old woman, her back hunched, her body frail and weakened by age and disease. She was a beggar woman, they said, accused of witchcraft. The accusation, absurd and baseless as it was enough to condemn her to the dungeon, a testament to the superstition and fear that permeated the medieval world. Her crime was not a tangible act, but a phantom offense, a product of fear and ignorance. Yet, she was treated no less harshly, left to wither and die in the squalor of this subterranean abyss. These three individuals, so different in age, background, and offense, represented a microcosm of medieval incarceration. Their fates, dictated by the whims of the Baron and the arbitrary application of justice, were a stark illustration of the inherent inequalities of the system. The severity of their punishments bore little relation to the severity of their crimes, a testament to the capricious nature of medieval law, where power, wealth, and social standing often dictated the outcome. It was a justice system that was both brutal and absurd, a system that cared little for fairness, truth, or the rehabilitation of the offender. In the midst of this grim tableau, I noticed a young man, barely more than a boy, who was incessantly polishing the Baron's discarded goblet with a rag fashioned from his own shirt. His eyes were wide and fearful, his movements hesitant and nervous. He had been arrested for trespassing on the Baron's land, a crime of such insignificance, I thought, that it would barely merit a reprimand in any rational society. Yet, here he was, a prisoner in the Baron's dungeon, enduring the same squalor and deprivation as the hardened criminals, his crime amplified by the whims of his captors. His trembling hands, as he meticulously polished the goblet, spoke volumes about the fear that had gripped him, the desperation that had overcome him. He was a victim, not of a heinous crime, but of the very system designed to protect the Baron's authority. Another inmate, a former knight, sat silently in a distant corner, his pride seemingly crushed by his predicament. He had been stripped of his rank, his honor, and his freedom, imprisoned for a crime I overheard him mutter about. A misplaced loyalty, he'd whispered one day, his voice barely a breath. His offense, likely a political infraction, had resulted in a far greater punishment than any common thief might face. His case highlighted the political machinations that often played out within the medieval justice system, where loyalty and betrayal were often the basis for imprisonment, the true crime being the wrong side of a power struggle. Even the guards, though seemingly brutal and indifferent, were not entirely devoid of human complexity. One, a grizzled veteran with a surprisingly gentle demeanor, would sometimes secretly slip us an extra piece of bread, a small act of mercy amidst the cruelty. Another, a younger man, seemed to derive a perverse pleasure from inflicting pain, finding entertainment in the suffering of others. These men, products of their own time and circumstance, embodied the extremes of human nature, highlighting the stark contrast between compassion and brutality in the medieval world. The days and nights blended together into a hazy kaleidoscope of suffering, punctuated only by the occasional outburst of anger, a desperate plea for mercy, or the quiet shuffle of feet across the damp stone floor. The weight of the chains, the gnawing hunger, the constant fear, all these were woven into the fabric of our existence. Yet, amidst the despair, there were moments of surprising resilience, moments of shared humanity that defied the brutal reality of our confinement. We shared stories. We offered what little comfort we could. We found solace in the companionship of fellow sufferers. We developed a language of unspoken gestures, subtle shifts in posture, and glances that conveyed empathy, understanding, and defiance. A surreptitious exchange of a scrap of food, a whispered joke, a shared look of understanding. These small acts became beacons of hope amidst the crushing darkness. The shared misery forged a bond between us, an understanding that transcended the differences in our crimes and backgrounds. We were all victims, in a way, victims of a system that valued power and authority above justice and fairness. The experience, though horrific, broadened my understanding of the human condition, teaching me that resilience, compassion, and the will to survive are as essential to the human spirit as breath itself. The iron cage of the medieval prison was a brutal and unforgiving place, but it was also a crucible where the human spirit was tested, refined, and ultimately, often, found to be unexpectedly strong. Even in the darkest depths of human despair, there remains an enduring spark of humanity, a testament to the enduring power of hope. The dungeon revealed not just the brutality of medieval justice, but also the remarkable capacity of people to endure unimaginable suffering, to forge connections in the face of profound isolation, and to find glimmers of humanity amidst that overwhelming darkness. It was a harsh and terrible education, but an education nonetheless. The bread thief, the blacksmith, the beggar woman, the knight, they were all part of a larger story, a story of oppression, injustice, and surprisingly, an enduring capacity for human resilience. The gnawing hunger was a constant companion, a relentless pressure in the pit of my stomach. Rations were meager, often spoiled, and always insufficient. Yet, it was the despair, the crushing weight of hopelessness, that proved to be the most difficult burden to bear. The sheer randomness of imprisonment, the arbitrary nature of justice, left a chilling sense of powerlessness. One day, you were a farmer tilling your field. The next, a nameless entity in a dark, damp hole. But amidst this bleakness, a flicker of hope occasionally ignited. I witnessed it in the eyes of the blacksmith, who, despite his grueling solitary confinement, maintained a stoic resilience. He'd spend hours meticulously whittling pieces of wood, transforming scraps into surprisingly intricate tools, tiny chisels, crude spoons, even a rudimentary lockpick. His actions, seemingly pointless within the confines of the dungeon, were a quiet testament to his refusal to surrender. They were a tangible expression of his determination to survive, to maintain his sense of self, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. His tools were not merely survival instruments, but symbols of defiance, a silent rebellion against the hopelessness of his situation. Then there was the young woman accused of bread theft. Initially, she had succumbed to despair, her spirit broken by hunger and the injustice of her confinement. But gradually, a subtle shift occurred. She started observing, learning from the more experienced prisoners. She learned how to identify edible weeds from the scraps brought in by the guards, how to conserve what little water she was given, and how to subtly barter with other inmates. Her transformation from a despairing victim to a resourceful survivor was remarkable. Her eyes, once hollow and lifeless, now held a glint of determination, a fierce spark of will. Her transformation, though gradual, was a beacon of hope in that subterranean abyss. She had found a path to survival, not by escaping the prison, but by finding ways to cope within the oppressive walls. Escapes, though rare and fraught with peril, were not entirely unheard of. One night, I witnessed a daring attempt by a young man imprisoned for poaching. He had meticulously studied the dungeon's layout, identifying weak points in the stonework. Over weeks, using his own makeshift tools and the help of a sympathetic guard who secretly provided him with extra rations in exchange for information about the outside world, he chipped away at a seemingly solid wall. His escape attempt was a testament to his remarkable ingenuity and the precarious balance of alliances within the prison itself. It was a thrilling, heart stopping gamble, a tale whispered in hushed tones amongst the prisoners. The fact that he'd risked his life for a taste of freedom showed the depths of human endurance and hope. Unfortunately, his attempt was discovered before he was able to break free. The guard was subsequently beaten mercilessly, and the young man's hopes were dashed. His failure, however, served as a stark reminder of the risks involved and the tenuous nature of even the most audacious plans. His story became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the high stakes and slim chances of a successful escape. Another inmate, a seasoned thief with a reputation for cunning, managed a remarkable escape. He'd exploited the lax security during a change of guards, slipping out through a poorly secured passage, a testament to his knowledge of the prison's vulnerabilities and his own dexterity. His story became legend amongst the prison population, a symbol of defiance and success in a hopeless situation. He was never caught, a testament to both his skill and the porous nature of medieval security. His freedom, however, was likely short lived. The world outside the prison was likely just as unforgiving as the world within. But the fact he'd achieved it, the legend he left behind, provided a flicker of hope for the others. The stories of escape, both successful and failed, were crucial for the morale of the prisoners. They fostered a sense of shared resilience, a belief that even in the most dire circumstances, freedom was achievable, that hope was not entirely extinguished. The stories became a source of inspiration, fueling the determination to survive, to endure the brutal conditions, to cling to the slimmest possibility of escape. The success or failure of an escape attempt often hinged not only on the ingenuity of the prisoner, but also on the complicity of, or at least indifference from, the guards. Some guards were brutal, sadistic even. Others, worn down by the monotony and the grim realities of their job, were more susceptible to bribery or even a surprising measure of compassion. The intricate web of relationships within the prison, the alliances forged between prisoners and guards, often played a crucial role in determining the outcome. The human element within the brutal environment was a surprising variable. In contrast to the audacious escapes and quiet acts of resilience, the majority of prisoners succumbed to the brutal reality of their confinement. Disease ran rampant, a relentless killer that decimated the prison population. Tuberculosis, dysentery, scurvy, and various other infections spread quickly in the cramped, unsanitary conditions. The lack of proper medical care meant that even minor ailments could quickly become fatal. The sheer physical and psychological toll of imprisonment led to a cycle of despair, weakening bodies and minds to the point where resistance crumbled. Hunger was a constant gnawing presence. Even those who managed to acquire some form of extra food often were left with the most meager portion. These prisoners, those who perished within the prison walls, served as a poignant reminder of the vulnerability of the human condition and the cruel indifference of the system. Their deaths were often unmarked, unceremonious, and forgotten, just another nameless body to be discarded. Their stories, though lost to history, nonetheless were a powerful testament to the harsh reality of medieval imprisonment. Their fate stands in stark contrast to those who found a way to survive and escape. The medieval prison, in all its grim brutality, was a crucible. It was a place where the human spirit was tested, broken, and sometimes, surprisingly, strengthened. It revealed the darker aspects of human nature: cruelty, greed, indifference, and despair. But it also showcased incredible resilience, ingenuity, and the enduring power of hope. It was a world of profound contrasts, a place where even in the depths of despair, humanity found a way to shine through. The contrast between the hopeless demise of many and the remarkable escapes of some created a captivating and brutal narrative of medieval prison life. The stories of survival, however, offered a stark and profound glimpse of hope, a testament to the human spirit's capacity to endure even the most extreme forms of oppression. The hope, however fragile, was a lifeline for those who survived. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit that such glimmers could be found within the darkest of places. Chapter 2: The Machinery of Injustice, Legal Processes and Their Absence. The stench of mildew and decay clung to the damp stone walls of the prison, a constant reminder of the precariousness of life within its confines. Yet, the horrors of the dungeon were not solely confined to its physical attributes. The true brutality lay in the system that delivered its inhabitants to this squalid existence, a system masquerading as justice, but operating more often on caprice and corruption. To understand the true depths of the medieval prison, one must understand the legal processes, or more accurately, the often alarming absence thereof, that led so many to their dark fate. Justice, as we understand it today, was largely absent from the medieval landscape. Due process, the cornerstone of modern legal systems, was a luxury rarely afforded to the common man. Accusations, often whispered or shouted in the heat of a moment, frequently carried more weight than any concrete evidence. The power of the wealthy and influential often eclipsed even the flimsiest of accusations, ensuring that the scales of justice tilted sharply in their favor. A nobleman's word could condemn a peasant to years of imprisonment, while the peasant's protestations remained unheard. One of the most chilling examples of this capricious justice was the widespread practice of trial by ordeal. Far from being a reasoned process of investigation and evidence gathering, these ordeals were, essentially, appeals to divine judgment, often resulting in brutal and frequently fatal outcomes. There was no consideration of a person's actual guilt or innocence. Instead, the outcome hinged on the person's ability to withstand excruciating pain or survive a potentially lethal challenge. The most common ordeals involved fire, water, and combat. Trial by fire involved carrying a red-hot iron bar a certain distance. If the wounds healed within a set time, the accused was deemed innocent. Trial by water, particularly prevalent in cases of suspected witchcraft, involved being bound and thrown into a body of water. Those who floated were considered guilty, their buoyancy interpreted as proof of demonic interference. Those who sank were presumed innocent, provided they could survive the ordeal. Trial by combat was reserved for those of noble birth or those who could afford a champion. The winner of the fight, regardless of the actual guilt or innocence of the parties involved, was deemed victorious in the eyes of God and the loser was typically executed. The arbitrariness of these methods is staggering. Survival often depended on factors completely unrelated to guilt or innocence. The skill of a blacksmith in creating a less damaging hot iron, the ability to hold one's breath, or the sheer luck of having a strong champion. The inherent dangers of these ordeals ensured that numerous innocent individuals were condemned to death or long imprisonment, their suffering serving only as a terrifying demonstration of the era's misguided approach to justice. Consider the case of Thomas, a humble weaver wrongly accused of theft. There was no concrete evidence against him, only the bitter testimony of a wealthy merchant whose silver chalice had vanished. Yet Thomas, lacking both wealth and influence, was subjected to trial by fire. Despite his innocence, the ordeal yielded a verdict of guilt. The searing pain of the hot iron left him scarred, both physically and emotionally. Though his wounds did partially heal, this was deemed insufficient, sending him to a life of misery and imprisonment. His fate underscores the brutality and injustice inherent within this system. Such stories were commonplace, highlighting the utter lack of fairness and the appalling human cost of this so-called divine justice. But the medieval legal system wasn't a monolithic entity. There were lawyers, of a sort, though their role was far different from that of their modern counterparts. Master Elias, a man whose sharp intellect was only matched by his sharp attire, provided a glimpse into the workings of medieval law. He was not a defender of the innocent, so much as a master of navigating the complex and often corrupt legal landscape. His expertise lay not in upholding justice, but in manipulating the system to achieve the most favorable outcome for his wealthy clients. Elias was often found in the dimly lit halls of the courts, his voice a low hum in the cacophony of accusations and counter-accusations. He understood the intricate web of influence, patronage, and bribery that dictated the course of legal proceedings. He knew that evidence held little sway against the weight of social standing or a well-placed bribe. He excelled at crafting persuasive arguments, even if those arguments twisted facts, ignored evidence, or even concocted outright lies. In his mind, he was not twisting justice, but navigating it. And for him, justice favored the rich and powerful. For Elias, justice wasn't about truth or fairness, but about the successful manipulation of a flawed system. While his counterparts might have relied on the sheer force of violence to influence outcomes, Elias wielded a different weapon, the subtle art of legal manipulation, a kind of verbal swordplay that carved its way through the ambiguities of medieval law. His skill was not in upholding justice, but in bending it to the will of his wealthy clients. He represented the privileged, the wealthy, those who could afford his services, not the peasant facing arbitrary accusations. He represented Lord Ashford, a man accused of assaulting a local farmer. The evidence was shaky, the farmer's word against the Lord's, but Elias, with a blend of shrewd maneuvering and carefully placed bribes, ensured that the Lord Ashford escaped any significant punishment, while the peasant received a harsh punishment for what was considered a false accusation. Elias, far from being a champion of fairness, was a product of his times. His success was measured not by justice served, but by his clients' satisfaction. He was the embodiment of a legal system rigged to protect the powerful and punish the weak. The contrast between the brutal realities of ordeals and the manipulative world of legal maneuvering highlighted the deep seated inequalities of medieval society. For the vast majority, justice was a distant dream, replaced by the arbitrary application of power and the capricious whims of fate. The system, rather than offering protection, perpetuated a cycle of suffering, ensuring that the poor and vulnerable were consistently subjected to the full force of injustice. Their stories, lost in the annals of history, stand as poignant reminders of the era's dark side, a stark counterpoint to the often romanticized narratives of medieval chivalry and courtly love. The absence of due process, the prevalence of ordeals, and the influence of wealth and power all contributed to a system where imprisonment could be easily obtained and escape often impossible. The medieval prison was not merely a place of confinement, it was the ultimate expression of a system that consistently failed to uphold basic principles of fairness and equality. It was the physical manifestation of a world where justice was more often a cruel joke than a tangible reality. The very foundation of their supposed legal system was built upon sand, shifting and crumbling, leaving those with the misfortune to fall under its remit utterly vulnerable. Their fate serves as a chilling reminder of how far, or perhaps how far, we still need to travel to achieve a true system of justice for all. The shadows of the past still linger, a testament to the enduring need for vigilance in our pursuit of a truly equitable legal system. The chilling reality of medieval prisons extended far beyond the physical horrors of damp dungeons and the arbitrary application of justice. A significant factor driving individuals into the clutches of these grim institutions was the pervasive issue of debt. The economic landscape of the medieval period was precarious, a tightrope walk between subsistence and destitution, where a single bad harvest, a sudden illness, or a minor legal dispute could plunge a family into inescapable debt, leading directly to imprisonment. This wasn't simply a matter of owing money, it was a system that often trapped individuals in a cycle of poverty and incarceration, with the line between debtor and criminal blurring beyond recognition. The feudal system, with its rigid social hierarchy and complex land ownership, fostered economic instability. Peasants, tied to the land and often reliant on the goodwill, or lack thereof, of their landlords, lived hand to mouth. Their livelihoods were vulnerable to the whims of nature, the demands of their lords, and the ever-present threat of famine. A poor harvest could wipe out a year's worth of meager savings, leaving them indebted to moneylenders or their own landlords. These debts, often accrued for seemingly trivial reasons, a slightly late tax payment, the cost of a desperately needed grain purchase, or even a small loan to buy tools for their trade, could quickly spiral out of control. The interest rates charged by moneylenders were exorbitant, compounding the debt exponentially, pushing families deeper and deeper into financial ruin. There was little to no legal protection for debtors. The law, in practice, often favored the creditor, leaving the debtor with little recourse but to endure imprisonment as a means of settling their accounts. Thomas, the weaver whose ordeal by fire we previously encountered, was not merely a victim of a flawed justice system, but also a casualty of the economic realities of his time. While the theft accusation served as the immediate trigger for his imprisonment, the underlying reality was a pre existing condition of chronic debt. Years of meager earnings, punctuated by periods of illness and unemployment, had left him constantly in debt to local merchants. He had taken out small loans to purchase wool, tools, and dyes for his trade, and the constant accumulation of interest had left him with a mountain of debt that he couldn't hope to repay. The theft accusation, however unfounded, provided the convenient excuse to throw him into prison, effectively silencing his complaints about the unfairness of his economic situation and transforming a financial problem into a criminal offense. His story illustrates the subtle yet pervasive link between poverty, debt, and imprisonment in the medieval era, revealing how financial instability became a pathway to incarceration. The imprisonment itself was a financial burden, not just for the imprisoned individual, but also for their family. Prisoners were not provided with food, clothing, or shelter. Their families were responsible for providing these necessities, a significant expense that often pushed them further into poverty. They would have to bribe guards for basic provisions like water and a somewhat less filthy corner to sleep in, and these petty payments, accumulating over months or even years of imprisonment, added another layer of economic hardship for those trying to secure their loved one's release. Even after their release, the cost of regaining freedom could be substantial. Prisoners were often compelled to pay exit fees or fines, sums that often exceeded their ability to pay, pushing them further into the cycle of debt and poverty. This exit fee was particularly pernicious for those imprisoned simply for debt in the first place, as their ability to pay the fee would only become more difficult with their extended stay in the dungeon. This created a system where the economic circumstances that led to imprisonment effectively ensured its continuation, an endless and disheartening loop of poverty and captivity. The economic implications of imprisonment extended beyond the confines of the prison walls and into the wider community. The loss of a skilled worker, like Thomas the Weaver, had a direct impact on his family's ability to support themselves. Their livelihood was severely impaired by his imprisonment, increasing their debt and making them more vulnerable to falling into the very same trap. This ripple effect highlights the systemic nature of the problem, where economic hardship contributed to imprisonment, which in turn perpetuated and exacerbated existing economic inequalities. The economic reality of the medieval prison system was particularly harsh for women, who often faced additional vulnerability due to patriarchal norms. Women, regardless of their economic standing, had fewer legal rights and less access to resources, making them more susceptible to exploitation and debt. Widows, in particular, were often left financially destitute upon the death of their husbands, leaving them even more dependent on the goodwill of others, or forced to take out high interest loans just to survive. This increased their risk of imprisonment, and the consequences of their imprisonment had even more serious consequences for their family and children. Their fate underscores the deep-seated economic and social inequalities that contributed to the cycle of poverty and incarceration. The comparison to modern legal systems reveals a fundamental shift in the way debt and imprisonment are viewed. While debt still contributes to incarceration in the modern world, the processes are vastly different. There are established legal frameworks to protect debtors, bankruptcy laws to mitigate the worst consequences of debt, and support systems for individuals struggling to manage financial difficulties. The medieval system, however, offered no such safety net. It treated debt not as a financial problem, but as a criminal offense, creating a climate of fear and exploitation, a climate where the slightest misstep could plunge an individual into the abyss of long term imprisonment. This highlights the stark contrast between past and present, showcasing how far, hopefully, justice systems have evolved. Thomas's story, and countless others like it, reveals a stark and uncomfortable truth. The medieval prison wasn't simply a place of confinement for criminals. It was a repository for the economically vulnerable, a dumping ground for those who couldn't afford to meet the demands of a ruthless economic system. The system was not designed for rehabilitation or reformation, but for control and the maintenance of the status quo, a system that often benefited from the continued poverty and oppression of those it imprisoned. The cycle of debt, imprisonment, and perpetual poverty provides a grim and telling insight into the socio-economic realities of medieval life and the deep flaws within the medieval concept of justice. Understanding this complex interaction of economic pressures and legal processes is crucial to comprehending the true brutality of medieval imprisonment, a brutality that extended far beyond the dark, damp walls of its prisons. The stench of mildew and decay clung to the air like a shroud, a constant companion to the chill dampness that seeped from the porous stones of the dungeon. Thomas, his body still aching from the ordeal by fire, huddled deeper into the meager straw pallet, trying to ignore the gnawing hunger and the incessant drip, drip, drip of water from the unseen fissures in the ceiling. He wasn't just a prisoner, he was a commodity, a source of potential profit for the jailer, a man whose name, if Thomas ever knew it, was lost in the swirling miasma of fear and despair that permeated the prison. The jailer, a burly man with a face etched with cruelty and avarice, was the undisputed master of this subterranean realm. His power was absolute, unchecked by any meaningful oversight or accountability. The law, such as it existed, was a distant echo, muted by the thick stone walls and the jailer's indifference. He held the keys, quite literally, to the prisoner's fates, and he used this authority not for the upholding of justice, but for personal enrichment and sadistic amusement. Thomas had witnessed it firsthand. It happened during the nightly rounds, when the flickering torchlight cast grotesque shadows across the damp walls, exaggerating the already pronounced features of the despairing inmates. The jailer had entered, not to check on the prisoner's well-being, a concept wholly alien to this place, but to conduct a transaction of a different sort. He approached a young man, barely a boy, who was shackled to the wall, his eyes wide with terror. The boy, Thomas learned later, was a thief, accused of stealing a purse. But the reality of the situation went far beyond the simple charge. The jailer pulled out a small pouch from his belt, its contents jangling faintly in the relative quiet of the dungeon. It was clearly a bribe. He offered it to the boy for the boy's freedom. In exchange for a sum of money, a substantial sum for his family, who were likely already destitute from the debt and legal fees, the boy would be released. The theft conveniently forgotten, leaving a few gold coins in the jailer's pocket. It was a mockery of justice, a perversion of the law, but it was business as usual in this forsaken place. The boy's eyes darted between the pouch and the jailer's hard face, a silent plea for help hanging in the air. His family likely couldn't afford the bribe, but the jailer offered the opportunity nonetheless. Another brick in the foundation of systemic corruption and cruel exploitation. The desperate hope in the boy's eyes was soon replaced by a crushing resignation as he acknowledged the impossible reality. This transaction wasn't an isolated incident, it was a systematic exploitation. The jailer's corruption wasn't merely about financial gain, it extended to acts of physical and psychological cruelty. Thomas witnessed numerous examples of this abuse. The jailer frequently used his position to torment the prisoners, striking them with impunity for the slightest infraction, or, more often, for no reason at all. The arbitrary nature of his violence highlighted the complete absence of legal protection afforded to those in his charge. The prisoners were at his mercy, subjected to his whims and cruelty without any recourse. The jailer's power extended even beyond the dungeon's confines. He controlled access to basic necessities, food, water, and rudimentary medical attention. He'd often withhold these essentials as a means of coercion, forcing prisoners to pay extra for what should have been their basic rights. This created a climate of fear and dependence, where the prisoners were utterly subservient to his will. He held their physical and mental survival in his hands, twisting the knife of desperation to extract whatever he desired, whether it be money, favors, or merely the pleasure derived from their suffering. The medieval prison wasn't just a place of incarceration, it was a breeding ground for cruelty and corruption. The jailer, a pivotal figure in this system, embodied the worst aspects of the era's justice system: the absence of meaningful oversight, the systemic corruption, and the blatant disregard for human dignity. He was a man who wielded the powers of life and death with ruthless efficiency, a microcosm of the larger societal failures that contributed to the grim reality of medieval incarceration. Thomas's observation wasn't simply a passive witnessing of events. It was a deep immersion into the heart of the medieval prison system's underbelly. He wasn't just enduring his own imprisonment. He was bearing witness to a far larger, more systemic evil, a grim theater of power dynamics and the dehumanization of the vulnerable. His experience wasn't unique. It was a common occurrence, a daily reality for countless individuals who found themselves trapped within the walls of medieval prisons. This pervasive corruption permeated not only the individual actions of the jailer, but also the wider legal landscape. The legal processes, if they existed at all, were frequently compromised or manipulated. Bribes were commonplace, and the influence of powerful individuals could easily sway the course of justice. The law, supposed to be a protector of the innocent, was often twisted and manipulated to serve the interests of the powerful and the corrupt. This created a system where the wealthy and influential could often escape punishment, while the poor and powerless were subject to arbitrary arrest, prolonged imprisonment, and even execution based on flimsy accusations or simply the whim of those in authority. The contrast between the medieval system and modern criminal justice is stark. Modern systems, despite their imperfections, have developed mechanisms to mitigate corruption, improve accountability, and ensure fairness, however imperfectly. Independent oversight, procedural safeguards, and access to legal representation are all features that safeguard against the kinds of rampant abuse witnessed in the medieval era. The story of the jailer and his corrupt practices serve as a potent reminder of the extent to which justice systems have hopefully evolved over time. It is a dark and necessary reminder of the brutal reality of the medieval period and the importance of constantly striving for justice and fairness within any legal system. The cold, hard reality was that the medieval prison wasn't simply a place of confinement. It was a complex ecosystem of corruption, power struggles, and despair. The jailer, with his unfettered authority and ruthless ambition, was the keystone in this grim edifice, holding the lives and fates of the incarcerated in his calloused hands. The system perpetuated a cycle of abuse and injustice that extended far beyond the individual experience of the prisoners. It was a reflection of the wider societal inequalities and the deep flaws that existed at the heart of medieval society, a stark reminder of how far our justice systems have, hopefully, evolved since that grim era. The memory of the flickering torchlight, the clinking of coins, and the boy's despairing gaze remain vivid, an unflinching portrayal of the machinery of injustice in its most raw and brutal form. The absence of proper legal processes, the exploitation of the vulnerable, and the arbitrary power wielded by the jailer paint a disturbing picture of a time when the concept of justice was little more than a cruel mockery. Thomas's survival in this environment was not just a matter of physical endurance, but a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming oppression and injustice. The experience left a deep scar on Thomas's soul, a constant reminder of the brutality and injustice that he encountered in the bowels of the medieval prison. His story, and those like it, serve not merely as a historical record, but also a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the importance of fairness, accountability, and the unwavering pursuit of justice within any societal framework. The memory of the events within those dungeon walls, along with the countless stories of others who endured similar circumstances, underlines the crucial need for constant vigilance and a steadfast commitment to protecting the vulnerable from the abuses of power. A vigilance that ensures that the lessons of the past serve as the foundation for a more just and equitable future. The dark shadows of the dungeon still haunt his mind, and the image of the jailer's cruel transaction remains an enduring symbol of medieval injustice, a sobering testament to the importance of the evolution and reform of our justice systems as we strive to build a world where such abuses are not merely relics of the past, but an impossibility in the future. The story of Thomas, a weaver caught in the harsh realities of medieval life and the corrupt system that imprisoned him, serves as a vital reminder that the pursuit of a just society is an ongoing process, one that demands constant vigilance and a relentless effort to ensure that the lessons of the past are never forgotten. The chill that permeated the dungeon walls was not solely the product of damp stone and lack of sunlight. A deeper spiritual chill seemed to cling to the air, a chilling testament to the bleakness of existence within those confines. Father Michael, a man whose faith was tested daily by the horrors he witnessed, knelt beside Thomas, the flickering candlelight casting long, dancing shadows across their faces. He'd come to offer solace, a sliver of spiritual comfort in a place devoid of nearly all else. Yet, even his unwavering faith struggled against the grim reality of the medieval prison. Father Michael's ministry wasn't confined to the whispered prayers and meager sacraments he offered to the incarcerated. He was a witness, a silent observer of the brutal mechanisms of injustice. He saw the arbitrary nature of arrests, the capriciousness of punishments, and the pervasive corruption that permeated the entire system. The church, in theory, was a beacon of compassion, a voice for the marginalized. Yet, in practice, its influence often appeared muddled, a complex tapestry woven with threads of both mercy and complicity. The church's official stance on punishment often mirrored the prevailing societal norms. While it championed the ideals of forgiveness and redemption, the reality was far more nuanced. The concept of penitence, central to Christian theology, was frequently twisted and utilized within the framework of the legal system. Penance, ideally a path towards spiritual cleansing, often manifested as brutal physical suffering, mirroring the harsh realities of imprisonment itself. Public floggings, humiliating displays of contrition, and prolonged periods of confinement, all undertaken in the name of divine justice, blurred the line between spiritual purification and cruel retribution. Father Michael, a man of deep faith and compassion, struggled with these contradictions. He saw the hypocrisy in a system that preached forgiveness while inflicting brutal suffering. He observed how often the severity of punishment was dictated not by the gravity of the crime, but by the social standing of the accused. A nobleman accused of theft might face a relatively lenient penalty, perhaps a fine or a brief period of house arrest. A peasant, on the other hand, accused of the same crime, might face months of brutal imprisonment, torture, or even execution. The church's involvement in the legal process wasn't always a benign force for good. While some clerics advocated for mercy and fairness, others actively participated in the mechanisms of injustice. They served as advisors to judges and rulers, often influencing decisions in ways that prioritized the interests of the powerful. Their pronouncements on matters of guilt and innocence, while ostensibly based on religious principles, were often susceptible to manipulation and bias. Father Michael witnessed this firsthand, observing instances where church officials, swayed by bribes or political pressure, influenced judgments, leading to unjust outcomes. The concept of God's law was frequently invoked to justify the harshest forms of punishment. Criminals were depicted as agents of Satan, deserving of divine retribution. This theological framework provided a veneer of religious sanction to the cruelty inherent in the medieval justice system. Father Michael, however, saw the humanity in even the most hardened criminals. He recognized that their actions were often driven by desperation, poverty, or the brutal circumstances of their lives. His ministry in the prison was a constant struggle against this harsh reality. He attempted to instill hope in the prisoners, reminding them of the possibility of redemption, even within the confines of the dungeon. He provided spiritual guidance, administered last rites, and offered what little comfort he could in the face of unimaginable suffering. His efforts were not always successful. The darkness that enveloped the prisoners, both physical and spiritual, was often overwhelming. Yet, Father Michael persevered, driven by a profound belief in the transformative power of faith. One particular prisoner, a young woman named Ilara, stands out in Father Michael's memory. Accused of witchcraft, a charge based on nothing more than unfounded superstition and fear, she was subjected to horrific treatment. She was confined to a damp cell, deprived of food and water, and subjected to regular beatings by the guards. Father Michael visited her regularly, offering words of encouragement and the solace of religious ritual. He tried to instill hope in her, but it was a losing battle. The weight of the accusations, the physical suffering, and the hopelessness of her situation proved too much. Ilara's eventual demise, while not directly inflicted by the Church, highlighted the inherent dangers of intertwining religious dogma with legal processes. Her fate became a sobering reminder of the failure of justice, the misuse of religious beliefs, and the devastating consequences for those caught in the system's cruel grip. The contradictions inherent in the Church's role in medieval prisons are stark. While it preached compassion and forgiveness, its practical influence often reinforced the brutal realities of the justice system. Clerics, often men of both power and influence, sometimes acted as agents of the legal process, furthering the injustices rather than mitigating them. Father Michael's perspective, steeped in his experiences within the prison walls, sheds light on the complexities of this dynamic relationship, highlighting the conflict between the lofty ideals of faith and the grim realities of medieval life. Father Michael's work was not just about offering spiritual comfort, it was about bearing witness. He bore witness to the brutality of the system, the suffering of the innocent, and the hypocrisy of those in positions of power. His personal struggle to reconcile his faith with the harsh realities he witnessed underscored the deep-seated moral dilemmas inherent in medieval society. The Church, with its potential to be a force for good, was often tangled in the web of societal injustice, resulting in a complex and often contradictory narrative. The stories of Thomas and Alara, and countless others like them, underscore the critical importance of separating religious beliefs from the legal system to create a more just and equitable societal framework. Father Michael's testimony serves as a compelling reminder of the historical dangers of such intermingling and the urgent necessity of ensuring that religion's role in justice remains one of compassion, mercy, and true spiritual guidance, rather than a tool for oppression or a justification for cruelty. The legacy of the medieval prison system, with its intertwined religious and legal aspects, remains a potent reminder of the complexities of the past and the continuing need for vigilance in the pursuit of justice. The echoes of those dungeon walls still carry the silent witness of countless individuals who suffered unjustly and whose stories, through the eyes of Father Michael, serve to illuminate the deep shadows of a bygone era, teaching us valuable lessons about the intricate relationship between faith, law, and justice. His experiences within the prison offer a critical insight into the failures of a system that sought to intertwine religious dogma with legal processes, resulting in a tragic paradox that left countless individuals suffering unjustly. The memory of those he served lingers as a powerful testament to the human cost of failing to uphold the ideals of compassion and fairness. The heavy oak door groaned open, releasing Thomas into the blinding glare of the midday sun. He blinked, his eyes, accustomed to the perpetual gloom of the dungeon, struggling to adjust. The world outside seemed alien, vibrant and overwhelming after months of monotonous darkness. Freedom, however, wasn't the unadulterated joy he'd imagined. It arrived burdened with the weight of unpaid debts, lingering physical ailments, and the chilling stigma of imprisonment. The coins he'd painstakingly scraped together, supplemented by the meager charity of Father Michael, barely covered the exorbitant exit fee demanded by the jailer. The prison, it seemed, extracted its final toll even as it released its captive. He stumbled out into the bustling marketplace, the cacophony of sounds and smells assaulting his senses. The familiar sights of his former life, the baker's oven, the cobbler's stall, the bustling tavern, now held a distant, almost unreal quality. They represented a life that felt irrevocably lost, a past he desperately wanted to reclaim, yet one that seemingly rejected his return. The physical toll of imprisonment was palpable. Months of confinement in the damp, disease-ridden cell had left him gaunt and weak. A persistent cough rattled his chest, a constant reminder of the unsanitary conditions he'd endured. His skin, pale and blotchy, bore the marks of deprivation and disease. The scars, both visible and hidden deep within, spoke of a brutal reality far removed from the idealized tales of chivalry and adventure. But the physical scars were less daunting than the social ones. The label of ex-prisoner clung to him like a shroud, whispering suspicions and judgments wherever he went. Potential employers recoiled at the mention of his past. Neighbors, once friendly, now cast wary glances, their whispers and averted eyes branding him an outcast. Even his own family, initially welcoming, grew hesitant, their pity tinged with unease. The stigma of imprisonment permeated every facet of his life, effectively barring him from regaining a semblance of normalcy. Finding work proved near impossible. His former skills, honed as a carpenter before his unjust incarceration, were of little use. The years lost behind bars had eroded his proficiency, and the pervasive prejudice against ex-prisoners further limited his opportunities. He applied for menial labor, but even the most desperate employers hesitated, fearing the repercussions of associating with a man who had spent time in prison. Desperation gnawed at him. Days bled into weeks, each filled with a growing sense of hopelessness. He found himself scavenging for scraps of food, sleeping under bridges, a stark contrast to the life he'd known before his arrest. The dream of rebuilding his life, a life free from the suffocating grip of the dungeon, seemed increasingly distant, a mirage in the harsh desert of his reality. His experiences weren't unique. Many released prisoners faced similar challenges, creating a vicious cycle of poverty and recidivism. The medieval justice system, focused on punishment rather than rehabilitation, left individuals ill-equipped to reintegrate into society. The lack of support systems for ex-prisoners mirrored the overall indifference to their plight. They were cast aside, left to fend for themselves in a world that had condemned them to perpetual marginalization. Thomas's story, however, took an unexpected turn. Father Michael, ever vigilant in his ministry, continued to offer support. He managed to secure Thomas a position, assisting with carpentry work at a monastery, a haven that offered a degree of understanding and acceptance. The work was arduous and the pay modest, but it provided a sense of purpose, a glimmer of hope amidst the darkness. The monastery wasn't without its challenges. The other workers, while initially wary, gradually came to accept Thomas, recognizing his genuine remorse and hard work. His skills, slowly revived under the guidance of the monastery's carpenter, began to return. His inherent talent, previously stifled by incarceration, found renewed expression. The monastery represented more than just work. It became a sanctuary, providing both physical and spiritual nourishment. It was a space where Thomas found a path toward personal redemption, a slow, arduous process of rebuilding his life, not just in terms of economic stability, but also in terms of personal dignity and self worth. But even within this sanctuary, the weight of his past remained. His nights were filled with restless dreams, haunted by the memories of the dungeon. The cold, damp air, the rattling chains, the despair in the eyes of his fellow prisoners remained vivid, haunting images that refused to fade. He sought solace in his faith, finding comfort in the spiritual guidance offered by Father Michael. Their conversations touched on themes of forgiveness, redemption, and the possibility of finding peace, even amidst the deepest shadows. Slowly, painfully, Thomas began to reconstruct his life. The scars of his imprisonment remained, but they became a testament to his resilience, a reminder of the hardships overcome. He found a measure of peace, a sense of belonging within the monastery community. He married a kind woman who saw beyond the stigma of his past, and together they raised a family. His story, while not a fairy tale, became a quiet affirmation that even after the deepest darkness, hope can ignite a new dawn. His experience, however, served as a stark reminder of the inherent flaws within the medieval justice system, where punishment was often far harsher than any crime committed, and where true rehabilitation was a rare exception. The absence of any formal support systems for former prisoners only underscored the brutality of a system that often equated release with abandonment. Thomas's eventual success, therefore, became a testament not only to his own resilience, but also to the limitations and inherent cruelty of the medieval penal system. The tale of Thomas and others like him remains a compelling argument for the need for humane and restorative justice systems capable of supporting the rehabilitation and reintegration of individuals who have served their time. It's a reminder that justice, true justice, extends beyond the confines of the dungeon walls and into the complex tapestry of societal acceptance, support, and second chances. The memory of his incarceration, however, was a constant companion, a reminder of the injustices endured and the battles overcome, forever shaping his outlook and his empathy for those who continue to struggle within the shadows of societal exclusion. His story stands as a testament to the endurance of the human spirit, the ability to find redemption, and the compelling need for reform within justice systems to ensure that the suffering of imprisonment does not extend beyond the prison gates, condemning individuals to a life of perpetual marginalization. Chapter 3: Echoes of the Past, Medieval Prisons and Modern Justice. The stark contrast between Thomas's experience and the realities of modern incarceration is jarring. While the medieval prison, with its inherent cruelty and lack of rehabilitation, left him scarred and marginalized, Modern prison systems, despite their flaws, aim for a different outcome, albeit with varying degrees of success. The shift from purely punitive measures to a theoretically more rehabilitative approach is undeniable, but the echoes of the past continue to resonate in the cracks of the modern system. One of the most striking differences lies in the legal framework surrounding imprisonment. The medieval system was characterized by arbitrary incarceration, often without due process or a formal trial. Accusations, sometimes fueled by personal vendettas or political machinations, were sufficient to land individuals in dungeons with little recourse to legal representation or appeal. Debtors were routinely imprisoned, their freedom contingent on repayment, a system that effectively criminalized poverty. In contrast, modern systems, ideally, operate under a rule of law, with established procedures, rights to legal counsel, and the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. While disparities in access to justice persist, the fundamental principles of due process, fair trials, and the right to appeal represent a significant advancement. However, even in modern systems, the realities of systemic biases, unequal access to resources, and wrongful convictions highlight the ongoing struggle for true justice. The physical conditions also represent a vast chasm. Thomas's description of the dungeon, dark, damp, disease-ridden, and overcrowded, paints a picture of abject misery, a stark contrast to the theoretically more sanitary and regulated environments of modern correctional facilities. Modern prisons are not idyllic by any means. Overcrowding, inadequate health care, and violence remain significant problems. However, regulations regarding sanitation, ventilation, and access to basic necessities represent a tangible improvement, even if inconsistently implemented. The prevalence of disease and vermin in medieval prisons, a constant threat to life, is largely mitigated in modern facilities, although outbreaks still occur, highlighting ongoing challenges related to sanitation and health care. The approach to punishment also underwent a dramatic transformation. In the medieval era, the focus was overwhelmingly punitive. Imprisonment served primarily as a means of incapacitation, deterrence, or even revenge. Rehabilitation was a non existent concept. The system showed little interest in reforming the prisoner or aiding reintegration into society. The exorbitant exit fees imposed upon release illustrate this point perfectly. They served as a final extortionate act, ensuring that even regaining freedom came at a steep price, further marginalizing those already at the edge of society. Modern correctional systems, while still relying heavily on punishment, attempt to incorporate rehabilitative programs such as education, vocational training, and counseling. The aim is to equip individuals with the tools to become productive members of society upon release. The effectiveness of these programs is a subject of ongoing debate. Success rates vary significantly, and the recidivism rates remain a persistent concern. However, the very existence of such programs demonstrates a shift in philosophy, a recognition that punishment alone is insufficient and that addressing the root causes of criminal behavior is crucial. Moreover, the nature of the prison population itself has evolved. In the medieval period, the prison housed a diverse group, encompassing those accused of serious crimes alongside those incarcerated for minor offenses, debt, or vagrancy. Modern prisons largely segregate prisoners by the severity of their offenses and security risk. This approach, while aiming for order and control, raises concerns about the creation of subcultures and the potential for radicalization within these groups. Additionally, the issue of mass incarceration, particularly in the United States, where the prison population is disproportionately composed of marginalized communities, highlights systemic inequalities that perpetuate the cycle of poverty and criminality. The social stigma associated with imprisonment, a significant hurdle for Thomas, persists in the modern world, though in different forms. While the overt exclusion and societal rejection experienced by Thomas are less common today, the stigma related to criminal records can create significant challenges in finding employment, housing, and accessing social services. This underscores the need for ongoing efforts to promote reintegration and reduce the barriers faced by ex offenders. A nuanced approach is required, one that balances the need for accountability and public safety with the imperative of rehabilitation and reintegration. The comparison, however, reveals that the underlying problem of inequality persists in both eras. The medieval system imprisoned the poor disproportionately, punishing poverty and lack of opportunity as much as crime. Modern systems, while not overtly targeting poverty in the same way, suffer from systemic inequalities that similarly affect marginalized communities. The overrepresentation of racial minorities and individuals from impoverished backgrounds raises serious concerns about the inherent bias within the justice system and the societal factors that contribute to criminal behavior. The cycle of disadvantage, poverty leading to crime, crime leading to incarceration, incarceration exacerbating poverty, continues to echo throughout the centuries. Furthermore, the issue of mental health remains an area of stark contrast and considerable challenge in both medieval and modern settings. In medieval prisons, mental illness was largely misunderstood, often attributed to demonic possession or divine retribution, leading to inhumane treatment. Modern systems, while possessing a more sophisticated understanding of mental illness, often struggle to provide adequate care for incarcerated individuals with mental health problems. Overcrowding, understaffing, and a lack of access to mental health professionals contribute to this issue, which leads to self harm, violence, and increased recidivism. Finally, the concept of restorative justice represents a modern attempt to address some of the shortcomings of purely punitive systems. This approach focuses on repairing the harm caused by crime and involving the offender, victim, and community in the process of reconciliation. It aims to move beyond simple punishment and towards healing and community restoration, mirroring some aspects of the more informal methods of dispute resolution sometimes present in medieval communities. While still relatively nascent, restorative justice offers a glimpse of a possible future, one that moves away from the purely punitive models of the past and strives for a more holistic and restorative approach to justice. In conclusion, while significant progress has been made in the treatment of prisoners since the medieval era, the journey toward a truly just and rehabilitative system is far from complete. The echoes of the past, the unequal application of the law, the harsh conditions of confinement, and the persistent societal stigma attached to imprisonment continue to resonate in the modern world. The challenges facing modern correctional systems are complex and multifaceted, requiring a multi pronged approach that addresses systemic inequalities, invests in effective rehabilitation programs, prioritizes mental health care, and embraces innovative approaches like restorative justice. Only through sustained effort and a fundamental commitment to fairness and rehabilitation can modern justice systems finally break free from the brutal legacy of their medieval predecessors and create a truly humane and effective system of corrections. The legacy of medieval prison practices extends far beyond the crumbling walls of forgotten dungeons. Its influence, subtly yet powerfully, shapes our modern understanding of justice, punishment, and the very concept of incarceration. While the stark physical conditions and arbitrary legal processes of the medieval era might seem distant, their echoes reverberate in the complexities of contemporary correctional systems and societal attitudes. Consider, for instance, the enduring concept of imprisonment as a primary form of punishment. The medieval period, despite its varied approaches to justice, solidified the idea of confinement as a legitimate and even desirable method for dealing with crime. While the sheer brutality of medieval dungeons, the lack of sanitation, the prevalence of disease, the absence of any rehabilitative effort might seem archaic, the fundamental principle of removing offenders from society persists in modern practice. However, the evolution from the purely punitive approach of the Middle Ages to a more nuanced, though still imperfect system that incorporates, at least in theory, rehabilitation, reveals a significant shift in our understanding of the purpose of imprisonment. The arbitrary nature of incarceration in medieval times, where imprisonment could be the consequence of debt, vagrancy, or simply falling out of favor with powerful individuals, left a lasting impact on the concept of due process. The absence of consistent legal frameworks and safeguards against arbitrary detention, even though greatly mitigated in modern systems, highlights a recurring concern: the potential for the abuse of power within the justice system. While modern legal systems emphasize the presumption of innocence, the right to legal representation, and a formal trial, the reality remains imperfect. Disparities in access to legal resources, systemic biases that disproportionately affect marginalized communities, and instances of wrongful convictions highlight the ongoing struggle to achieve true equality within the application of the law. The medieval system's casual disregard for individual rights serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of justice and the constant vigilance required to prevent its erosion. The social stigma associated with imprisonment also carries a heavy weight of history. In the medieval world, incarceration was often viewed as a mark of shame, rendering the ex-prisoner ostracized and marginalized, a pariah forced to rebuild his life from the ruins of societal rejection. This social condemnation, though expressed in different forms in modern societies, persists. While overt ostracism is less prevalent, the stigma associated with a criminal record remains a formidable obstacle for ex-offenders seeking employment, housing, or even simple acceptance within their communities. This enduring legacy underlines the necessity of addressing this stigma through comprehensive reintegration programs that provide ex offenders with the support they need to rebuild their lives and contribute positively to society. The failure to adequately address this societal stigma perpetuates the cycle of recidivism, reinforcing the very problems that the criminal justice system is intended to address. The mental health implications of imprisonment represent another significant area where the echoes of the past are particularly resonant. In the medieval era, mental illness was often misinterpreted and mistreated, with incarcerated individuals suffering from mental health conditions, facing inhumane conditions, and lacking any form of effective treatment. Modern correctional systems, despite advancements in understanding and treatment of mental illness, still struggle to provide adequate care for prisoners with mental health needs. Overcrowding, understaffing, and a lack of access to mental health professionals in many facilities contribute to poor mental health outcomes among incarcerated individuals, leading to increased self harm, violence, and recidivism. This persistent challenge underscores the urgent need for a comprehensive and compassionate approach to mental health care within prisons, an approach that recognizes the unique needs of incarcerated individuals and prioritizes their well being. The failure to provide this care not only violates the basic human rights of those incarcerated, but also jeopardizes public safety by perpetuating cycles of violence and mental health crises. Furthermore, the concept of rehabilitation, almost entirely absent in medieval prisons, represents a significant point of divergence. Medieval imprisonment served primarily as a punitive measure. It was about inflicting suffering and removing offenders from society, not about reforming them or aiding their reintegration. The modern emphasis on rehabilitation, however flawed in practice, marks a critical evolution in our understanding of the role of corrections. The implementation of rehabilitative programs, from educational opportunities to vocational training and counseling services, aims to equip individuals with the skills and support needed for successful reintegration upon release. However, the effectiveness of these programs varies greatly, and the persistent challenge of high recidivism rates necessitates a continuous evaluation and refinement of rehabilitative strategies. The uneven application and success of these programs highlight the urgent need for greater investment in research and implementation to ensure that these initiatives are truly effective in reducing crime and improving the lives of those who have been incarcerated. The study of medieval prisons offers a sobering lens through which to examine contemporary justice systems. While advancements have been made in legal frameworks, physical conditions, and the inclusion of rehabilitative measures, the underlying issues of inequality, the lasting impact of stigma, and inadequate mental health care remain persistent challenges. The harsh realities of the medieval period serve as a cautionary tale, reminding us that the pursuit of justice is a continuous process that requires constant vigilance, reform, and a profound commitment to fairness and human dignity. The legacy of injustice is not simply a matter of historical curiosity, but a living force that continues to shape our present. The task ahead is to learn from the failures of the past and work towards a more just and humane future, ensuring that the echoes of medieval brutality do not drown out the voices of those striving for a better tomorrow. The lessons learned must not be confined to history books. They must inform policy and practice, ensuring that the brutal legacy of the past never fully defines the future of justice. The stark reality of medieval prisons, as we have explored, paints a grim picture of suffering and injustice, but beyond the broad strokes of systemic cruelty lies a deeper challenge: recovering the individual stories, the forgotten voices of those who endured these horrific conditions. To understand the full impact of medieval imprisonment, we must attempt to unearth these narratives, to give voice to the voiceless, even across the chasm of centuries. This, however, proves to be a formidable task, hampered by the inherent limitations of the historical record. Medieval society, unlike our own, did not possess a sophisticated system for systematically documenting the experiences of the incarcerated. Prison records, when they exist at all, are often fragmentary, incomplete, and biased. Official documents, primarily focused on administrative details, the prisoner's name, if recorded, the date of imprisonment, the alleged crime, and occasionally the sentence. These records rarely delve into the psychological and physical realities of prison life, the daily struggles for survival, the gnawing despair, the agonizing loneliness. They offer a skeletal framework, a stark outline devoid of the flesh and blood of human experience. One of the significant hurdles in reconstructing the lives of medieval prisoners lies in the nature of the surviving sources themselves. Most written accounts come from the perspective of the powerful, the prison wardens, the judges, the chroniclers of the ruling class. These perspectives, naturally, were seldom interested in the minutiae of prisoner suffering. Their focus was on the administrative aspects of incarceration. The legal proceedings, however flawed, and often the moral lessons to be drawn from the punishment. The voices of the prisoners themselves are almost entirely absent from these official narratives, effectively silencing their experiences and reducing them to mere instruments of justice or victims of its failings. Occasionally, glimpses into the prisoner's world emerge from unexpected sources. Literary works, particularly those with a satirical or social commentary bent, offer glimpses into the conditions of imprisonment. Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, for example, though fictionalized, provides a darkly humorous portrayal of social injustice, including the fates of individuals who faced imprisonment for various offenses. These literary depictions, while not strictly factual accounts, provide valuable insights into the societal perceptions of imprisonment, the attitudes of both the incarcerated and those outside the prison walls. However, it is crucial to interpret these sources with caution, acknowledging the author's biases and literary intentions. These are not objective historical reports. They are shaped by the writer's worldview and their creative choices. Another avenue for investigation involves exploring archaeological evidence. Excavations of medieval prisons and dungeons have unearthed physical artifacts that offer tangible evidence of the grim realities of prison life. Fragments of pottery, bone fragments, tools, and even the very structure of the prisons themselves can provide crucial information about daily life behind bars. The layout of a cell, the presence or absence of sanitation facilities, the quality of building materials, these details contribute to a richer understanding of the physical conditions endured by prisoners. Archaeological findings can also provide evidence of diseases prevalent within the prison environment, revealing the devastating impact of infection and unsanitary conditions. While archaeology offers valuable insights into the material reality, it cannot unveil the emotional landscape of prison life. The artifacts themselves remain silent witnesses to the human drama they bore silent witness to. Moreover, the study of legal records, though lacking in personal accounts, can reveal important information about the types of crimes that resulted in imprisonment, the length of sentences, if any were imposed, and the social backgrounds of prisoners. Analysis of court records, tax documents, and other administrative papers allows historians to piece together statistical profiles of the incarcerated population. Such analyses provide a broader contextual understanding of who was imprisoned, why, and under what circumstances. This approach, however, still limits understanding to a quantitative and broadly based overview, leaving the rich, complex individuality of each prisoner's experience largely unknown. Yet, despite these limitations, historians have made strides in recovering glimpses of the individual experiences of medieval prisoners. Through painstaking research and careful interpretation of fragmented sources, scholars have begun to reconstruct narratives that challenge the monolithic view of medieval imprisonment. For instance, the discovery of personal letters written by prisoners, though rare, provide invaluable first-hand accounts of their emotions, fears, and hopes. These letters, smuggled out of prison or left behind after release, offer intimate glimpses into the human cost of incarceration, revealing a depth of suffering not found in the cold, official documents. These fragments, though scattered, offer a more human understanding of the experience. The analysis of religious writings, such as accounts of saints or monastic chronicles, can provide additional perspectives on prison life, albeit often filtered through a religious lens. While focusing on spiritual resilience and redemption, these narratives sometimes offer poignant accounts of suffering and the resilience of the human spirit, providing glimpses into the everyday realities of those living in close proximity to spiritual guides in a prison environment. These accounts serve as important reminders of the diverse ways in which individuals experienced imprisonment, shaped by their faith and beliefs. The recovery of these stories, however, often requires creative and interdisciplinary approaches. Historians increasingly engage with methodologies from literary studies, anthropology, and even forensic science to deepen their understanding of the past. Combining textual analysis with archaeological findings and anthropological perspectives allows for a more holistic and nuanced reconstruction of the prisoner's experiences. Furthermore, collaboration with experts in related fields like criminology can help in contextualizing medieval punishments within broader historical trends of societal attitudes towards crime and punishment. The process of recovering the stories of medieval prisoners is not just an academic exercise, it's a moral imperative. By amplifying their voices, by acknowledging their suffering, we not only enrich our understanding of the past, but also illuminate the enduring challenges of justice and human rights. The echoes of their experiences continue to resonate in modern debates about incarceration, highlighting the continuing struggle for a more humane and equitable approach to punishment. The project of recovering the past is never fully complete, The quest to hear the silent voices and bring those long forgotten experiences into the light forever continues. The search for the truth, even when fragmented, distorted, and incomplete, remains a fundamental element in shaping a more just and informed future. Every fragment of evidence, every surviving piece of the puzzle, brings us closer to understanding the human cost of injustice, both then and now. The silent testimonies of medieval prisoners, though difficult to recover fully, serve as a stark and enduring reminder of the need for constant vigilance against cruelty and oppression within the criminal justice system. Their stories, even in their incompleteness, demand to be heard. The grim picture painted by the physical realities of medieval prisons, the damp, the disease, the deprivation, underscores a far deeper absence, the systematic recognition of fundamental human rights. The very concept of inherent rights, entitlements belonging to all individuals simply by virtue of their humanity, was largely absent from the medieval worldview. While religious and philosophical discussions touched upon notions of natural law and divine justice, these concepts rarely translated into concrete protections for the incarcerated. Prisoners were largely considered instruments of the state, their well being a secondary concern to the overarching aims of punishment and social control. Their suffering, while acknowledged in some instances, was often seen as a deserved consequence of their transgressions, or simply an unfortunate byproduct of the system. The evolution of human rights, as we understand them today, represents a long and arduous journey, a gradual shift in societal attitudes towards the individual and their inherent worth. This transformation began not with grand pronouncements or revolutionary upheavals, but rather with incremental changes in legal frameworks and social practices. The seeds of modern human rights can be found in scattered edicts, legal pronouncements, and philosophical debates that emerged gradually throughout the centuries following the Middle Ages. One of the earliest discernible steps towards the recognition of prisoners' rights can be found in the gradual development of due process in legal proceedings. While medieval justice systems were often arbitrary and capricious, the later medieval period witnessed a slow but discernible improvement in procedures relating to arrest, trial, and sentencing. The concept of a fair trial, while not universally applied, began to gain traction, particularly among the burgeoning merchant class and the urban elite. The increasing importance of commerce and trade necessitated a degree of legal predictability and consistency, reducing the arbitrary application of justice that previously prevailed. This move towards formalized legal processes implicitly recognized that individuals, even those accused of crimes, possessed a certain standing before the law, requiring certain minimum safeguards to prevent unfair treatment. The rise of humanist thought during the Renaissance and the Enlightenment further propelled the evolution of human rights. Thinkers like Erasmus, Montaigne, and later Locke and Rousseau challenged the prevailing authoritarian structures and advocated for individual liberties and inherent rights. Their ideas, rooted in reason and philosophical inquiry, laid the groundwork for the development of modern human rights discourse. The emphasis on human dignity, individual autonomy, and the limitations on state power profoundly influenced the development of legal and political thought in the centuries that followed. Although the implications of these philosophical debates did not immediately translate into concrete legal protections for prisoners, they planted the seeds for future reforms. The Reformation, with its emphasis on individual conscience and the direct relationship between the individual and God, also played a role in challenging the absolute authority of the state. The growing emphasis on individual responsibility and moral agency, while not always uniformly applied, gradually eroded the perception of prisoners as purely objects of state power. This shift in focus towards the individual helped to lay the groundwork for a more nuanced understanding of justice and punishment. The Enlightenment's contribution to human rights is undeniable. Thinkers such as Montesquieu and Beccaria provided critical analyses of existing justice systems, emphasizing principles of fairness, proportionality, and the minimization of suffering. Beccaria's On Crimes and Punishments, a landmark text of the Enlightenment, condemned torture and advocated for humane treatment of prisoners, laying the groundwork for a significant shift in attitudes toward penal reform. Montesquieu's emphasis on the separation of powers in government also served to limit the arbitrary power of the state and ensure a greater degree of protection for individuals under the law. While their ideas were not always immediately implemented in practice, they had a lasting impact on subsequent reforms of the justice system, directly influencing the movement towards more humane treatment of the incarcerated and towards the recognition of basic human rights for all, regardless of their criminal status. The abolition of torture and cruel and unusual punishment was a significant step forward in the evolution of human rights and a direct consequence of Enlightenment ideals. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, reformers and activists fought against the widespread use of torture and other forms of inhumane treatment in prisons. The development of more formalized legal processes and codified laws further reinforced this movement towards humane treatment, defining acceptable practices and limiting the scope of state power in dispensing punishment. The 19th century witnessed a surge in social reform movements, fueled by the reek of industrialization, urbanization, and growing social awareness. Prison reform became a prominent area of concern, with reformers advocating for improvements in prison conditions, educational opportunities, and rehabilitation programs. The movement away from the purely punitive approach to imprisonment gained momentum, with an increasing emphasis on reform and rehabilitation as goals of incarceration. This period also witnessed the emergence of organized prison reform societies, advocating for changes in laws and public policies related to incarceration. The 20th century brought about significant international developments in the field of human rights. The horrors of World War II led to the creation of the United Nations and the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, a landmark document that enshrined fundamental human rights and freedoms for all individuals, regardless of their status. This declaration served as a catalyst for numerous international and national initiatives related to human rights, including the protection of prisoners' rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, while not legally binding in itself, exerted enormous moral and political influence, leading to the creation of various international treaties and conventions that codified the principles of human rights and prisoners' rights. These documents established minimum standards for the treatment of prisoners, prohibiting torture, inhuman, or degrading treatment, and guaranteeing access to legal counsel and fair trial. These treaties, along with domestic legislation based on the principles of the Universal Declaration, have established a crucial foundation for safeguarding human rights and significantly reduced the likelihood of abuses. The post World War II era also saw the emergence of powerful human rights organizations dedicated to monitoring human rights violations, advocating for reform, and assisting victims of abuse. These organizations play a vital role in holding governments and other institutions accountable for upholding human rights standards. Their monitoring and reporting on prison conditions and their advocacy for legal reforms have contributed significantly to improving prisoners' rights globally. However, the journey towards full realization of human rights and prisoners' rights remains ongoing. Even today, many challenges persist. Overcrowding, inadequate health care, and systemic human rights abuses remain prevalent in many prisons around the world. The struggle for a just and humane approach to criminal justice requires ongoing vigilance, activism, and commitment to upholding the fundamental principles enshrined in international and national legal frameworks. The evolution of human rights, from the brutal realities of medieval prisons to the relatively sophisticated protections afforded prisoners today, is a testament to the power of social movements, legal reforms, and philosophical debate. The story is not one of swift progress, but rather a slow, incremental march toward a more just and humane society. The echoes of the past, though haunting, serve as a reminder of the hard-won gains that must be constantly defended and advanced. The journey is far from over. The pursuit of a world where every individual's inherent rights are truly respected and protected continues. The journey through the dark and damp corridors of medieval prisons, a journey undertaken in these pages, has undoubtedly been a grim one. We have witnessed firsthand the stark realities of incarceration in a time when the concept of human rights, as we understand them today, was largely absent. The casual cruelty, the pervasive squalor, the complete disregard for the basic dignity of the individual. These are not mere historical details. They are stark reminders of the potential depths of human inhumanity and the fragility of justice when unchecked. But this book is not merely an exercise in morbid curiosity. It is a study in contrasts, a comparison between a brutal past and a hopefully more enlightened present. The echoes of those medieval dungeons should not simply haunt us, they should inform us. The lessons learned from studying medieval prisons are multifaceted. First and foremost, it underscores the critical importance of due process. The arbitrary nature of medieval justice, where imprisonment could be meted out without trial, without evidence, and without recourse, stands in stark contrast to the principles of fairness and equality that underpin modern legal systems. The right to a fair trial, to legal representation, to the presumption of innocence. These are not mere technicalities. They are fundamental safeguards that protect individuals from the arbitrary power of the state. The medieval experience serves as a potent reminder of how easily those safeguards can be eroded and how vigilance is required to maintain them. Secondly, the medieval prison reveals the crucial role of humane treatment in any system of justice. The appalling conditions of medieval dungeons, the disease, the starvation, The sheer physical brutality highlight the inherent inhumanity of systems that prioritize punishment over rehabilitation, retribution over reform. The lack of basic sanitation, the rampant spread of disease, the indifference to the suffering of the incarcerated, these were not merely unfortunate consequences of limited resources. They reflected a deeply ingrained societal belief that prisoners deserved their suffering. This stands in stark contrast to modern understandings of justice, which increasingly emphasize rehabilitation and the importance of maintaining the dignity of the incarcerated, even those found guilty of serious crimes. The physical and psychological toll of incarceration needs to be considered not as a desired outcome, but as a symptom of systemic failure. Thirdly, the study of medieval prisons illuminates the interconnectedness between social structures and the justice system. The medieval prison was not an isolated institution, it was a reflection of broader societal values and power dynamics. The disparities in treatment based on social class, the unequal application of justice, and the systemic biases embedded within the system, all these highlight the importance of considering the societal context in which any system of justice operates. A just society requires not only fair laws and procedures, but also a commitment to addressing underlying social inequalities that can contribute to crime and disproportionately impact certain segments of the population. The lessons of the medieval past are clear. A just system requires not only a reform of its institutions, but a transformation of the society it reflects. However, the study of medieval prisons does not simply serve as a cautionary tale. It also offers a source of hope, a testament to the capacity for human progress. The stark contrast between the medieval world and our own some highlights the considerable advancements made in the pursuit of a more just and humane society. The slow, incremental, but undeniable shift toward the recognition of human rights, the development of due process, the abolition of torture, and other inhumane forms of punishment. These represent significant triumphs, a testament to the power of sustained social and legal reform. The future implications of understanding the medieval prison system are profound. By studying the mistakes and injustices of the past, we can better safeguard against their recurrence in the present. This entails not only the continued vigilance in defending existing human rights protections, but also a commitment to continuous improvement. We must remain ever vigilant against the subtle and overt manifestations of injustice within our own systems, the biases that creep into judicial proceedings, the conditions that perpetuate cycles of poverty and crime, the indifference that allows human rights violations to persist in the shadows. The ongoing challenges facing modern justice systems are numerous. Overcrowding in prisons, inadequate health care for incarcerated individuals, the disproportionate incarceration of certain racial and ethnic groups, and the continuing debate over the efficacy of various forms of punishment. These are all issues that require ongoing attention and reform. Understanding the historical context of incarceration, the lessons learned from centuries of struggle for a more just and humane society, equips us to address these challenges more effectively. The past illuminates the path forward. It reveals the enduring importance of due process, humane treatment, and a holistic understanding of the societal factors that contribute to crime and punishment. The evolution of the justice system is not a linear progression. It is a complex and often contradictory process marked by both advancements and setbacks. The horrors of medieval prisons should serve as a potent reminder of the fragility of human rights and the constant vigilance required to uphold them. It is a reminder of the dangers of unchecked power, the importance of empathy, and the necessity of ongoing critical examination of the institutions that claim to dispense justice. The final thought, therefore, is not one of despair, but of cautious optimism. The road to a truly just and equitable society is long and winding, marked by both triumphs and setbacks. The study of medieval prisons, with all its grim details, provides a valuable perspective, a sobering reminder of the distance we have traveled and the journey that still lies ahead. By understanding the past, we equip ourselves to navigate the challenges of the present and to strive for a future where justice is not merely dispensed, but truly served. The echoes of the past, though haunting, should inspire, not paralyze, our efforts to build a better world. The struggle for justice, for a society where the rights of all are truly respected, is a continuous and evolving process. It is a journey that demands our constant vigilance, our ongoing commitment, and our unwavering belief in the possibility of a more just and humane future. The medieval prisons stand as a stark reminder of what we must avoid, and the pursuit of justice provides the impetus to shape a better future.